to our first event for the winter term here at IFLS. Today we have Miriam Zucker with us, a visiting researcher at the Institute, who is with us or has been with us for the month of February. I have asked Miriam to give a kind of introductory set of remarks on who she is, what she's doing, and what her overall project is from which this particular talk has been taken, so that we have a bit of context to what we are going to hear. It's a very interesting topic, interesting conversation. Hopefully we'll follow. It is somewhat probably like any other topic relating to the Middle East, controversial, but hopefully I'm sure in a good way. And I very much look forward to the talk and to the conversation afterwards. With this, Miriam, I'm going to leave the virtual floor to you with the only remaining comment that this event is being recorded. So when people are asking questions or making comments, they should be aware of the fact that the recording will be available freely online later on. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hanagme Zaberi, for this introduction. I'm excited to virtually visit the Osgood Institute of Feminist Legal Studies and looking forward to fruitful discussions with all of you. So thank you for hosting me. So my scholarship is situated in the intersection of multiculturalism and feminism, and deals with the issue known as minorities within minorities. My interest in this issue goes back to my work at the Israeli State Attorney Office when I represented the Ministry of Transportation in a petition of NGOs to the Supreme Court of Israel. The petitioners asked the court to order the ministry to stop ultra-Orthodox Jews from practicing sex segregation on public buses. Since the early 2000s, women who entered public buses in many ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods have been asked to enter the back doors of the bus and sit in the back seats, while men entered the front doors and usually sat at the front. For several years, secular Jewish women complained about this discrimination until NGOs took the case to the Supreme Court. These NGOs petitioned against the compliance of the Ministry of Transportation with this practice. We, the state attorneys who represented the Ministry of Transportation, argued that it is not our place to force the ultra-Orthodox passengers to stop this practice. Forcing them to do so, we claimed, would unproportionately interfere with their religious freedom. So both we, the state attorneys, and the court operated under the assumption that there are two groups here, the secular women and the ultra-Orthodox community. The work on this case brought me to reflect on the place or the absence of the ultra-Orthodox women. What is their position on this issue? Maybe there are ultra-Orthodox women for whom this practice is offending and humiliating. Unlike secular Jewish women who are obviously not bound to the norms of the ultra-Orthodox community, for ultra-Orthodox women, resisting sex segregation on the bus might cost them dearly. They could be ostracized by their community and even by their family. Since then, I felt kind of an urge to explore further the issue of minorities within minorities. Today, I examine this issue, which I define as the problem of intra-group vulnerability, in a different context, that of polygamy among the Bedouin-Arab minority in Israel. So let me share my screen with you. And okay. So in this talk, I explore two major questions. Should the liberal state address concerns about the oppressive potential of minority culture practices for women? And if so, what approach should the state take to this end, and how this approach can inform state laws? In a nutshell, I argue that the state should address concerns of intergroup vulnerability because it has a role in creating and perpetuating the conditions that render minority women vulnerable to oppressive treatment. This role is overlooked in the theoretical scholarship, and it is this overlooking that explains the limitations of scholar proposals for addressing these concerns. Therefore, recognizing the responsibility of the state for the intra-group vulnerability of minority women is key to my proposal for overcoming these limitations. Let me take you through a brief description of the way that this argument unfolds throughout the presentation. I begin by critically examining the two theoretical approaches for addressing intra-group vulnerability concerns. Then, using an intersectional feminist analysis, I consider the problem of intra-group vulnerability in context by investigating the case of polygamy among the Bedouin-Arab community in Israel. Next, I use this case to critically reflect on the theoretical scholarship. Out of this critical analysis, I propose an alternative approach for addressing concerns of intra-group vulnerability. Finally, I briefly demonstrate how this alternative approach could be implemented in the Israeli context. So critical work on liberal multiculturalism offers two opposite responses for addressing concerns of intra-group vulnerability. The first, which I define as intervention to protect liberal rights, gives a positive answer to the first question that we began with. According to this approach, the state should interfere in minority communities' affairs to protect their vulnerable members, and it should do so by using all available means, including criminal law. The second is the exit right solution, which basically gives a negative answer to this question. The state should refrain from intervening in minority communities' affairs as long as these communities' members are free to leave the community. Now, there's a third kind of response, which is the dialogue or deliberation proposals. But these proposals offer a procedure to resolve this issue, rather than a substantive approach to address intra-group vulnerability concerns. Therefore, as you can see in this diagram, I leave this approach on the side. So if we think how the first two opposite approaches could be implemented to actual contexts by considering their application to addressing polygamy, we find that they come down to a binary of criminalization and laissez-faire policy. The problem with these approaches is that they both seem detached from the interests and needs of minority women and girls. Rarely do women and girls benefit from putting their family members in jail, while leaving the community is either impossible or undesired or both, because it often requires the individual to leave their whole world behind. Now, drawing on intersectional feminist work that emphasizes the importance of contextual inquiries for learning about women's interests and needs, I examined the case of polygamy among the Bedouins in Israel. This inquiry reveals the role of Israel in the vulnerability of Bedouin women to oppressive marriage arrangements, since Israel occupied the Bedouins' traditional land in three important aspects. The first is creating new incentives for Bedouin men to marry additional wives. The second is the decline in Bedouin women's status within the family and the community, since they lost their productive role in the tribal economy. The third is Israel's role in fortifying obstacles to the ability of Bedouin women to break away from unfavorable marriage arrangements by creating discriminatory accessibility barriers to public services, including family courts and welfare assistance. Now, to understand the role of Israel in the vulnerability of Bedouin women to oppressive marriage arrangements, let me give you some background about the Bedouins in Israel and the practice of polygamy in this community. So the Bedouins are Arab Muslim tribes that live across various countries in the Middle East. They used to live in desert regions and follow a nomadic lifestyle. But by the turn of the 20th century, Bedouins in the territory that was then Palestine were already settled and they were running a sedentary lifestyle. In the state of Israel, the Bedouins are a subgroup within the Arab minority, representing around 18% of Arab Israelis. Most of the Bedouin population in Israel lives in the Negev desert area, located in the south of the country. You can see this area here in the map. The Negev land was occupied by the Israeli army in 1948 when the State of Israel was established. Now, Bedouin marriage patterns are based on kinship relations. Marriages occur for the purpose of increasing the size and the power of each extended family group through procreation and by creating social and political relations within the extended family and between clans. Therefore, marriages take place only within the tribal limits, and women are driven to marry for the sake of the collective. Research attributes the origins of these marriage patterns to the Bedouins' former nomadic lifestyle. When the Bedouin wandered the desert, kinship marriages were crucial to consolidate the political power of the tribe and assure its survival. Women could only marry a man of their tribe to ensure an increase in the tribe's warriors. Today, most young Bedouin couples in Israel are still married into kinship marriages. Polygamy has existed in Islamic family law for more than 13 centuries. The Quran allows men to marry up to 4 wives. According to the Islamic law, a man is required to deal justly with his wives and maintain the financial means to support them. The importance that Bedouins ascribe to high birth rates as means to increase the power of their extended family, along with the permissive approach of Islam to polygamy, made it a popular practice during their nomadic past. But in the first half of the 20th century, the practice became very limited. The transition of the Negev's Bedouin to a sedentary lifestyle, which did not require wars over resources, seems to explain the decline in polygamous marriage at that time. Although plural marriage is prohibited under Israel's punitive code, The practice has regained popularity among the Negev's Bedouin in the second half of the 20th century. Researchers estimate that around 30% of the Bedouin families in the Negev are polygamous. They also estimate that in the last 2 decades of the 20th century, there was a significant rise in the number of polygamous marriages among the Bedouins at a rate of 1% per year. So how can we explain this increase? There are a few factors that can shed light on the prevalence of polygamy among the Negev's Bedouin. A careful inquiry into these factors reveals that they can be generally accounted for as a result of an intersection of the Bedouin tradition with urbanization and accelerated modernization that was forced on this community since 1948, when Israel occupied the Negev land. Before the 1950s, most Bedouin tribes were spread around the relatively fertile northwest of the Negev. They substituted on agriculture and raising livestock. Women worked in subsistence farming, and they were responsible for grazing sheep and producing food and clothing, while men were responsible for guarding the land. During the 1950s, Israel concentrated the Bedouin tribes in a defined area at the northeast of the Negev. Many Bedouin were forcefully removed from the northwestern Negev land. The region was declared a military zone, and Bedouins were banned from entering the land outside of the defined area. The Bedouins lived under military rule until 1966. When the military governance ended, the Bedouins were permitted to return to the area outside the defined area. However, much of the northwest Negev land was already occupied by Jewish population that had settled there, and military camps and training zones had been built across the Negev. Still, many Bedouins returned to this area, but the tribal order that depended on a well-defined division of the land among tribal units was disrupted, and Bedouin sources of livelihood, especially the availability of land for resident agriculture and rearing livestock, was diminished. Now, if you look at the map at the right of the slide, on the right, you can see the division of the Negev land between Bedouin tribes before 1948. From the 1960s until the 1990s, in an attempt to end the land conflict, Israel tried to settle the Bedouins in 7 urban-style townships that it built in the area that was formerly the defined zone. Today, around 70% of the Negev's Bedouins live in these townships. Most of the remaining Bedouins live in unrecognized villages outside this area, where they can maintain a semi-nomadic lifestyle. According to Israel's planning and building laws, these populated villages are not recognized by the State of Israel, and they are zoned as agricultural land. Building permanent structures in these villages is therefore prohibited. Heavy fines and demolitions are imposed on any person or structure found to be breaching this prohibition. Therefore, many Bedouins in the unrecognized villages live in shacks and tents and suffer from lack of basic infrastructure and services, such as regular water supply, electricity, healthcare, and education. Now, the living condition of Bedouins in the townships are also poor. These townships were designed as dormitory towns with very few services and lack of infrastructure for economic and social development, such as industrial zones, public transportation, and even complete sewage system. So against the backdrop of the Bedouins' tribal history and their kinship marriage structure, these events have impacted the Bedouin social, economic, and political organization in various ways that could explain the popularity of polygamy within their communities. One significant factor is the impact of the disruption of the Bedouins' traditional lifestyle on the status of Bedouin women in the family and the community. After the displacement of the Bedouin from the fertile land in the northwest Negev, women could no longer maintain their productive roles as farmers. Today, while Bedouin men work in urban areas in Jewish cities and neighboring towns in the Negev, only 16% of Bedouin women are part of the labor market, compared to around 64% of women among the Jewish population. Simultaneously, the disruption of the Bedouin traditional lifestyle has led to the fortification of patriarchal norms in this community. The loss of an autonomous lifestyle has led the Bedouins to manifest their internal autonomy through stricter adherence to cultural practices, including polygamy. Finally, whereas the gradual transition to a sedentary lifestyle has suppressed wars between the Bedouin tribes over sources of livelihood, the establishment of the township and the gathering of different tribes under one local authority have given a modern political form to the tribal wars. Because of the elimination of the Bedouins' traditional forms of livelihood and the problematic planning of the Bedouin townships, there are very few workplaces in the townships. The two main sources of income for the township's residents are the income security benefits that are paid to low-income families by the government and employment by the local authorities. In local elections, candidates run as part of their clan and are expected to look out for clan interests at the municipal level. Therefore, in a democratic election system, the size of the clan has a critical effect on its political survival. In these circumstances, the aims of increasing the clan birth rate and keeping women within the clan have regained a modern rationale, encouraging polygamy. Now, given the high levels of unemployment in this population, many Bedouin men who take additional wives cannot afford to support more than one spouse, if any. Because divorce is stigmatized in the Bedouin society and may cause disputes between the couple's extended families, Bedouin men often use polygamy as a way out of their first marriage. The consequence of subsequent marriage can be devastating for a senior wife. Typically, the man will move in with his new wife, while the senior wife with her children are often left to live at the outskirts of her husband's or his extended family's household area. Any financial assistance or emotional support she may have received from her husband will likely be diminished. But Bedouin women in polygamous marriages rarely leave their marriage. Bedouin women are expected to accept polygamy as an integral part of their life and bear children for their husband even after he practically abandoned them. A Bedouin woman who divorces her husband commonly faces severe penalties. She may find that her own family is not willing to support her and may even ostracize her. A divorced Bedouin woman may also lose custody over her children, as the Bedouin norm is that the best interest of the child is to grow up in their paternal extended family's care. Effectively, when a polygamist man abandons his old family, his senior wife becomes the sole provider for their children. But the National Insurance Institute of Israel, which is the governmental division responsible for the implementation of the income security law, refuses to recognize these senior wives as unsupported parents, denying that they and their children are eligible for welfare benefits as a single parent family. The practice of the National Insurance Institute is to allocate a joint benefit to the polygamous family. According to this rule, the amount that each polygamous wife receives is only a couple hundred new Israeli shekels, while a single parent is entitled to a minimum of around 2,800 new Israeli shekels, which is not a lot, but way more than what a polygamous wife can get. So actually, even if an abandoned polygamous wife manages to receive her own share of the joint benefit from her husband, the funds are insufficient to satisfy her and her children's basic needs. Ultimately, this discriminatory allocation of the income security benefit leave polygamous senior wives dependent on their husband and therefore discourage them from breaking away from this family structure. Now, discriminatory barriers to the access of Bedouin women to the legal aid service that Israel provides to its low-income residents fortify obstacles to the ability of polygamous wives to leave their marriage. These barriers are the result of intersecting discrimination of Bedouin women as Arab, Muslim women, and residents of the Bedouin localities. Legal aid application forms, information about the service, and the service itself are not equally available in Arabic as they are in Hebrew. That is, despite of the fact that Arabic is the language of the largest national minority who have lived on the land of this country for many decades. In addition to these language barriers, Bedouin women face significant geographical barriers, which put the legal aid service out of reach for many of them. The legal aid district offices are located in several major cities across the country. In order to make the service accessible to people who live far from the major cities, the legal aid district offices operate branches in welfare department and community centers in local municipalities. However, research comparing the number of legal aid branches in different areas across the country found a considerable gap between localities where the majority population is Jewish and localities where the majority population is Arab. For example, the legal aid office in the South District, where the Negev is, operates branches in large Jewish localities, as well as in the small Jewish locality Netivot, which only has a population of approximately 35,600 residents. However, no legal aid branch is to be found in the largest Bedouin locality, the city of Rahat, which has a population of approximately 69,000 residents. Now, Bedouin women are most affected by these discriminatory accessibility barriers to the legal aid service, especially when seeking assistance with family matters. First, a Muslim woman in Israel, for a Muslim woman in Israel to obtain a divorce, she would have to pursue a legal battle in the Sharia court. A court order to dissolve her marriage will be granted to her only if she is able to provide justified ground for ending her marriage. Second, the rate of unemployment of Bedouin women and the patriarchal norms of marriage and child custody in the Bedouin community are especially significant. Because of these economic vulnerabilities, financial assistance in pursuing family law proceedings is crucial to securing Bedouin women's ability to access the courts. So far, we have seen how investigating the vulnerability of Bedouin women to oppressive marriage arrangements highlight how Israel is implicated in their intra-group vulnerability on two important levels. First, it illustrates how Israel's policy of pushing the Bedouin out of their traditional land has reinforced this vulnerability. And second, this investigation reveals how discriminatory accessibility barriers to public resources and services, including legal aid in family matters and welfare assistance, fortify obstacles to the ability of these women to live an unfavorable marriage arrangement. So, if we use this case to reflect on the theoretical scholarship on this issue of intra-group vulnerability, we realize that the state is treated by scholars as a bystander. The possibility that the state has a direct role in the problem is not considered. This overlooking of the state's role could explain the binary of the solutions that scholars propose to this problem. As a bystander, the state is limited to response strategies of either intervening to save women from their oppressor, which is, as we have seen, the solution that it is offered by the interventionist approach, or holding back, which is basically the solution offered by the exit right approach. But if we recognize the role of the state in the intra-group vulnerability of women, then a wholesale of other possibilities for addressing this problem opens up, such that focus on mending the wrongs of the state or alleviating the harms that it caused to these women. Now, while the exit models tend to let the state off the hook by allowing it to alienate itself from the problem, the interventionist approach simply throws the entire responsibility on the community. Still, the exit right solution has an important advantage over the interventionist approach. By respecting illiberal preferences, basically the decision to stay, the exit right models treat women as agents of choice rather than victims who need to be saved by the state. But the problem with the traditional understanding of the exit solution is the limited inventory of choices that it offers, to leave or stay. Here again, we see a binary that ignores the complexity of autonomy and choice in these contexts. To address this limitation, I propose a refined understanding of the exit solution, which I call the gradational exit approach. I created this term to emphasize two main aspects of my proposal. One, that there is no formula or one-fits-all solution, but rather that each case differs from the other. And two, that it is a gradual process. This refined understanding supports also intermediate forms of exit, like withdrawing from a certain practice or any other unfavorable aspect of the community life. Often, such options align better with women's interests and needs than leaving the community with their whole world behind, as the traditional understanding of the exit solution proposes. Now note that I deliberately use the word approach and not solution, as I do not purport to offer a magic bullet that will simply end the problem. Rather, embedded in my proposal is an understanding that internal cultural change would more reasonably happen gradually in small steps. So if we go back to the diagram we started with, it recaps my analysis. We see the binary of the solution that scholars propose and their translation to legal policies of criminalization and laissez-faire. The two long arrows, one pointing up and the other down, represent my methodology. Whereas the scholarship on intra-group vulnerability is invested in theoretical, abstract analysis, my work uses a contextual analysis. It is only this contextual analysis that allows us to notice the role of the state in this problem, realize that it's overlooked in the theoretical scholarship, and understand the need to consider an alternative approach. The next step, represented by the other long arrow, the one going down, is the practical takeaway of my argument in the Israeli context. So to summarize, if we consider my argument in Hoffeldian terms, then given the state's role, the state has a duty towards minority women. Hence, minority women are the right holders. The refined understanding of the exit solution as a gradational approach gives meaning to the state duty to support the ability of minority women to make different exit choices, first and foremost by addressing its own contribution to obstacles to these women's ability to make different exit choices. In the Israeli context, this would require, to the very least, removing the discriminatory accessibility barriers of Bedouin women to family courts by providing legal aid service in Arabic and in the Bedouin localities. It would also require removing the discriminatory barriers to Bedouin women's access to welfare assistance by recognizing abandoned polygamous wives' entitlement for income security benefit as single parents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for this wonderful presentation. I have one question to start the conversation, but let me ask if there are any questions in the audience before I pose the question. Any questions, comments?
There are none, Henkel.
None? Okay, so let me just, maybe later on, yeah. Let me just ask you, Miriam, if you use the word vulnerability quite often in the course of the presentation and in the course of the work, and I'm vulnerability.
Oh, vulnerability.
And I'm sure that it's central to your understanding of women's treatment, basically both directly and indirectly by state and through the acts of different acts of state. Do you have you had any interest in exploring further different theoretical works on vulnerability, what really it means for you. Do you have any, are you using vulnerability in a general kind of literal meaning of the word, or do you have a particular understanding of it?
That's a great question. I actually, it's actually the first time that this race, like I gave some talks and I think I use it in the literal kind of thing, but I would be very happy to learn about this discussion, because I'm more focused on the discussion, you know, between multiculturalism and feminism, and
Right.
my case studies. But this, I'm not. I would be happy to hear more about that.
So vulnerability has been explored more in philosophical work than in legal literature. Although I think there is feminist scholarship that borrows from feminist scholarship in philosophy, focusing on the word itself. I think one of the people, probably Martha Nussbaum, would be a good starting place to look. And then obviously, you know, it's been vulnerability has been explored in the context of intersectionality as well. It might be worth, I don't know to what extent it might change the direction of your research, but it might be worth just trying to see what kind of implications it might have if you had you know, adopted some forms of vulnerability against others. I'm not sure if it's really consequential for your research, but I think it's an interesting kind of sideways.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. Martha Nussbaum, I feel that her, well, at least her discussion, like her response to Aachen, she's more on the liberal feminist side, which I have I find mostly Aachen is the representative of this approach, but it's the intervention is basically the idea that, you know, they're a universal principle, and shouldn't be any difference of you know, enforcing the liberal rights within minority communities. We should you know, getting in. So she's more on Aachen side in this debate. Right. But yeah. Right. Yeah, but it might be, you know, that's another aspect of her work. Do you mean like it has a connection to her capabilities idea? You know, her capability.
It has, no, I think yeah, I think it is connected, but I'm not sure if Nussbaum focuses on vulnerability specifically or exclusively, rather, in the context of women or feminism. This is a more general philosophical well, it's a more general approach to a term that could have a philosophical way of understanding as well. But I'm sure in feminism, especially in intersectional feminism, it's been explored more. I'm not familiar with that literature particularly. I've looked at the more theoretical approaches to this, not even in the context of women necessarily, just in general in the context of minority groups. But I guess it shouldn't be difficult to research that specifically in feminist literature.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Thank you for that. That's a term that I...
Any other questions?
Emma has a question.
No.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I lived in northern Israel for a little while. I live near some, I guess, urbanized Bedouin communities, which are obviously quite different from a lot of people's existences in the Negev. And I guess I'm curious about it. It has always seemed to me that Israel's approach with the Negev Bedouin communities has been this sort of insistence on urban integration, and it's sort of and it just seems so non-negotiable. And I'm curious about how I guess what you see in terms of the real potential for shifting away from where things are at now, and like whether there's any hope for a stronger embrace of the sort of plurality that you are sort of advocating for.
Can you please repeat the end of your question, if there is?
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of wondering what the realistic, how realistic it is that we might move forward towards something that is more embracing of sort of justice for like Bedouin communities and the most vulnerable people within Bedouin communities.
Thank you. It's actually a very good question, because it's I think it's the heart of my argument that we should not treat the problem of women, of minority women, intra-group vulnerability with the inter-group vulnerability of the group, like just as a whole, as one. As one issue. That's why what I try to refer to in my short introduction about the ultra-Orthodox community. I think it's we have to think that women could have a very different voice. They might they might comply with some of the practice, might not, but we actually, I think that was recently. I will tell you actually something that happened quite recently. Israel for over 60 years, it had the prohibition, the ban of plural marriage for many years, since the 50s, and it did not enforce this prohibition. And just 2 years ago, while I was working on my dissertation, suddenly, not finally, I'm not actually very happy of how it happened, but suddenly the Attorney General gave new guidelines that this offense must be enforced, rigorously enforced, but at the same time, also responding to international criticism of the CEDAW committee, the government decided to establish a task force that will try to address the negative implication, that's how it was called, polygamy to women and also to the larger society. What was actually the conclusion of this task force was, I felt that there were good intention of trying to address the discrimination of the Bedouin community, especially in terms of access to services. But it was treated as the whole community as one, as a monolith, right? And I feel it was very problematic, especially because this committee was established to explore ways to contend with the negative implication of polygamy for women. So that's a very central part of my argument, which says, okay, we should also we should not just treat the issue of minorities as one problem. There should be, if we think in terms of, for example, of international law. So there are conventions regarding minority rights, but there's nothing about women within them. Maybe we can think about it as something of agency right for women, and how can we attend that? So I don't know if it's so I actually think that the focus should be different if we deal with the issue of women, but of minority women. But of course, I'm not. It doesn't have to be the case that those that progress on the level of with the Bedouin community in general has to be in competition with addressing the problem of intra-group vulnerability in this community. Sometimes, very often, those strategies might actually align and even complete each other, right? So, yeah, that's so there is some kind of progress, but it's not enough, I would say.
Thank you. Yeah, I was curious as well. Like I understood that in Israel polygamy is a criminal offense, but they sort of ignore it when it comes to Bedouin groups. Yeah, and I was curious, like your thoughts on, like, so long as polygamy remains a criminal offense, even if they claim to sort of, overlook what's happening in Bedouin communities, like is the existence of that criminal offense just like too much of a barrier for actual progress?
I think I'm not claiming to abolish the ban on polygamy, but I think there are maybe more accommodating and efficient way to deal with it. So, for example, one actually very important recommendation of this committee that I talked about, the task force that was established to address polygamy. They had one suggestion that was immediately rejected by the government, but it was very interesting. They suggested to actually have a procedure of authorizing polygamy in certain cases. But what was interesting in this procedure that that the court would have to hear the senior wife, and the resolution has to take care of her financial interest. So he won't be able just to abandon her. So that's actually a very interesting way to deal with it. It's also involved, and that procedure will happen in the Sharia court, because in Israel, I don't know if you're aware, there's a system of a religious court for every community. that has a jurisdiction on issues of marriage and divorce, an exclusive jurisdiction, not on issues of child support or whatever, but just the matter of itself, marriage and divorce, and dissolving the marriage. So it would involve the proposal of the committee was that it would involve the Sharia court to be an actor, an involved actor to lead maybe the community to some kind of cultural change, even in the way that just polygamy is practiced, in a way that would not leave the senior wife and her children at the outskirts of their husband family household without any without being dependent on the mercy of the family, without, in poverty. So that could be an interesting way to go about. But as I said, the government immediately said no polygamy, without trying to think through this. No, we're not going to authorize polygamy, but I'm not sure that putting Bedouin men behind bars would do any good for those senior wives. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your work. It was so interesting.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Lial, do you see any other questions or?
No, Hengame, I don't. There's nothing in the chat.
Okay, great. So Miriam, do you have any concluding remarks? If so, it would be great to hear them. And if not, I guess this is a good time to end the event. And thank you, Miriam, one more time for visiting with us and also for giving this talk today. And thank you to the few of the audience who took the time to participate. And I look forward to future events of the Institute. Miriam, any other comments you might have as ending remarks?
No, just that I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to talk with you, and there were interesting points that I'll explore further, and I think that's what it is about, this scholarly conversation, which is very helpful for me, especially now when I just defended my dissertation and thinking forward and on future work. So it's thank you for that.
Great. Congratulations on finishing the doctorate degree, and
thank you.
Good luck with your future research. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lial, for helping with the logistics of the event.
No problem. Thanks, Hengame. Thanks, Miriam.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.